All right, say something.
Boo.
That's not what I meant.
It's the bearded historian for the Bud Files, Joe, and we're going to take a little bit of a tour through the northern hills and speak a bit about the history involving Deadwood, Lee, a couple of the other towns up north. Now, originally Deadwood was, yes, illegal in the 1870s. They were basically mining on land that was granted to the Lakota people by the Treaty of Fort Laramie, and the treaty had guaranteed ownership of the Black Hills to the Lakota people, who considered the area sacred. The settlers squatting on numerous land disputes, several of which wound up in the Supreme Court. Well, everything changed when a certain guy by the name of George Armstrong Custer made a small expedition into the Black Hills. From North Dakota, they went down through the Black Hills, discovered gold all the way down on French Creek near Custer. Now, this pretty much turned into a catalyst because any place for miners and entrepreneurs would look for an area to settle and set up shop. They, settled and found the town of Deadwood, and interestingly enough, population went quickly to 5,000 people, and by 1877, a year later, 12,000 people had settled in Deadwood, and some sources put that number the previous year at 25,000, so populations were growing exponentially. In 1876, a frontiersman by the name of Charlie Utter and his brother Steve led to Deadwood a wagon train containing what they believed were needed commodities to bolster businesses. The town's numerous gamblers and prostitutes staffed several profitable ventures. Madame Mustache and Dirty M were on the wagon train, and they set up shop in what was referred to as Deadwood Gulch. Women were in high demand by the miners, and the business of prostitution proved to be a good market. Madame Dora Dufresne eventually became the most profitable brothel owner in Deadwood, followed closely by Madame Molly Johnson. Deadwood became quite known for this lawlessness. Murders were common, and justice for murders not always fair and impartial. The town attained further notoriety when Wild Bill Hickok was killed August 2nd, 1876. Both he and Calamity Jane were buried at Mount Moriah Cemetery. We've been there.
Been there twice.
And as well as other notable figures such as Seth Bullock. Now, Hickok's murderer, Jack McCall, was prosecuted twice, despite the U.S. Constitution's prohibition against double jeopardy. Now, the way they found a way around this is because Deadwood was not a legal town in Indian territory. Non-native civil authorities lacked the jurisdiction to prosecute him. So they moved his trial to a nearby Dakota Territory court, and he was found guilty of murder there and hanged. Now, beginning August 12, 1876, a smallpox epidemic swept through. So many people fell ill that tents were erected to quarantine the stricken.
That seems like it's safe.
Oh, yeah, let's just hide out. Don't go over there. Why? Well, everybody over there is sick. Okay. And then, of course, in 1876, George Crook pursued the Sioux Indians from the Battle of Little Bighorn on an expedition that ended in Deadwood in early September. This was known as the Horse Meat March. This was a particularly awful scenario where they actually outran their supply lines, and when they ran out of supplies to eat, they had to resort to, taking care of their own horses the improper way. Same month, business Tom Miller opened the Bella Union Saloon. The following year, on April 7th, Al Sweartigan, who controlled the opium trade in Deadwood, opened a saloon. His was called the Gem Variety Theater. The saloon burned down and was rebuilt in 1879, and then it burned down again in 1899. After that, Sweartigan left town.
Fires are popular in Deadwood. I think they've had, 4 or 5 now?
4 or 5 majors, yeah. And now, as the economy shifted, it went from gold panning to deep mining. Individual miners would go elsewhere or begin working in other fields. This is when you would start seeing places like Keystone would develop. Custer was already, well underway. They had mining in places like Galena. There were still placer miners down by like Rapid Creek, down where Silver City is. The miners started spreading out looking for more of those trace golds that worked by placer mining using a pan. Now, hence Deadwood lost some of its rough and rowdy character and began to develop a more prosperous town. Well, about the same time, the Homestake mine in nearby Lead was established in October of 1877. Now, this mine operated for more than a century, becoming the longest continuously operating gold mine in the United States. The gold mining operations did not cease until 2002. The mine has been open for visiting by tourists. We actually got to go into the shaft house at Deadwood.
That will be coming up shortly. And my grandfather worked in the gold mine for many, many years.
Now, interesting little item. In 1879, Thomas Edison demonstrated the first successful incandescent lamp in New Jersey. And September 17, 1883, Judge Squire P. Romans took a gamble and founded the Pilcher Electric Light Company of Deadwood. He ordered an Edison dynamo, wiring, and 15 incandescent lights with globes. After delays, the equipment arrived without the globes. Romans had been advertising an event to show off the new lights and decided to continue with the lighting, which was a success. His company grew. Deadwood had electricity service fewer than 4 years after Edison had commercialized it, and less than a year after commercial service was started in Roselle, New Jersey. So,
and for a rural nowhere in America, which really was rural back then,
we had light bulbs. In 1888, J.K.P. Miller and his associates founded a narrow gauge railroad, the Deadwood Central Railroad, to serve their mining interests. In 1893, the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad purchased the railroad. In 1902, a portion of the railroad between Deadwood and Lead was electrified for operation as a interurban passenger system and operated until 1924. In 1930, the railroad was abandoned, apart from a portion from Kirk to the Fantail Junction, and that was converted to standard gauge. Fun little history note, this line was also used to move coal to keep the Kirk producing electricity and served the Northern Hills for years.
We drove through Cook. It was on the Sideways Adventure. If you ever guys want to check that one out, it's in the playlist.
And in 1984, Burlington Northern Railroad abandoned the remaining section. Now, some of the other early town residents and frequent visitors included Martha Bullock, Aaron Dunn, E.B. Farnham, Samuel Fields, A.W. Merrick, Dr. Valentine McGillicuddy, one of my favorite history people, Reverend Henry Weston Smith, also known as Preacher Smith, Soul Star, Charlie, and Steve Utter. Now, I have not watched this. Yes, yell and scream all you want. I've never watched the TV show Deadwood. I've heard it's good.
Either.
But at the same time, this is natural history to us, so it's fun stuff to study. Let us know in the comments. Now, the gold rush did attract Chinese immigrants to the area. The population peaked about 250. Few engaged in mining, most worked in the service enterprises. Chinese quarter arose on Main Street, as there were no restrictions on foreign property ownership in Dakota Territory, and a relatively high level of tolerance of different peoples existed in the frontier town. Wang Fei Li arrived in Deadwood in 1876 and became a leading merchant. He was a community leader among the Chinese Americans until his death in 1921. The quarter's residents also included African Americans and European Americans. During the 2000s, the state sponsored an archaeological dig in the area to study the history of this community and diverse residents. Now, there is a museum in the downtown area. It used to be one of their train stations, and you can see some of the stuff that they've dug up in their archaeological digs. It is pretty awesome. They also post from time to time Destination Deadwood on Facebook. Check it out. Give them a like. In the 20th and 21st centuries, a major fire in September 1955 nearly destroyed the town. About 4,500 acres were burned and an evacuation order was issued. Nearly 3,500 volunteer and professional firefighters, including personnel from Homestake, Air Force at Ellsworth, and the South Dakota National Guard, worked to contain the fire. The property losses resulted in a major regional economic downturn. In '61, the entire town was designated a National Historic Landmark for its well-preserved collection of late 19th century frontier architecture. The architecture in Deadwood is so cool. I mean, you just walk down through the main street. They've got brick streets in the old part of town. It's just, the vibration is just awesome in that town.
It's very, very interesting.
Yep. The town's population continued to decline through the 60s and 70s. Interestingly enough, when they built I-90, it bypassed Deadwood in 1964, diverting travelers and businesses. May 21st, 1980, a raid by county, state, and federal agents on the town's 3 remaining brothels, the White Door, Pam's Purple Door, and Dixie's Green Door, accomplished, as one reporter put it, what Marshall Hickok would never have done, and the houses of prostitution were padlocked. A fire in December of 1987 destroyed the historic Syndicate building and a neighboring structure. The fire prompted renewed interest in the area and hopes for redevelopment. Organizers planned the Deadwood Experiment, in which gambling would be tested as a means to stimulate growth in the city center.
It became Gamblewood.
Yes. At that time, gambling was legal only in the state of Nevada and Atlantic City. Now, Deadwood was the first small community in the U.S. to seek legal gambling revenue to maintain local historic assets. The state legislature legalized gambling in Deadwood in 1989, which generated significant new revenue and development. The pressure of development since then may have been an effect of the historical integrity of the landmark district. Heritage tourism is important for Deadwood and the state. As we saw with the previous museum in the Days of 76 Museum, we also took and went to the Adams house.
Which will be on Friday.
Yes, double bonus. Now, next up that they talk about, when you look at Deadwood, for the longest time everybody would always say Lead and Deadwood. Because literally the towns are like bookends.
They are really, they just literally sit on top of each other. Oh, well, they touch each other. They don't really they kind of do overlap.
They overlap in a couple points. Also interesting is that there's 2 towns, and one town, if you sneeze, you will miss it. It's a town called Pluma. It basically is one building that is like the welcome sign, a bathroom, and on the other side of the connection is Central City, which is pretty well sandwiched between both parts.
Which we do drive through, and my grandparents lived in for many years.
Now, in opposite directions from the Lead and Deadwood Experiment, if you continue up and out of the Boulder Canyon, you'll run into the third of 3 cemeteries, Oak Ridge Cemetery, which is the only one that's presently accepting, people who have passed on. The other 2 cemeteries in town, according to the records, are closed, which I'm surprised the Roman Catholic cemetery is closed, because there's still areas where you could, dig and bury bodies. But, I don't know, maybe you could only if you've already established that you're going to be buried there, you can take and put in for the plots. But up that road, you would wind up back up in Sturgis. And interestingly enough, the railroad that used to go through the area went up the canyon, and when they got done deciding to close it off, they simply just paved it over with concrete. The other direction out of town, from Lead, goes up into some more of the more serious mining areas. Nevada Gulch is up there. The former town of Terry is up in that neck of the woods. Terry, surprisingly enough, all that remains of the town is the cemetery.
Which we will do eventually.
It's way up on a hilltop, covered in trees, and completely surrounded by a mine. Another town similar to that effect was the town that was known as Terraville. Terraville was kind of a frustrating item because it was a neat little town. It had a lot of buildings. But then Homestake decided that they needed to expand their mine to continue operations. And so basically they told everybody, well, you'll either need to move your buildings or we're going to level them. And some of the buildings were actually able to be moved. I think one of the churches wound up in Deadwood. A couple buildings wound up in Lead. The thing that was frustrating about it is that I think they destroyed the town, I want to say it was like 1989, and then of course the mine closed 13 years later. So congratulations, our town is under that big hole in the ground that you see over here.
Pretty much.
By the way, if you ever want to see a very, very big, deep hole, we do have a video that was taken when we did the bus tour in Lead.
Coming up.
And you'll get to see a very big crater. And if you're really, truly bored and you want to play tourist out here sometime, they'll actually let you knock golf balls into the big hole. It's going to be the easiest hole in one you've ever seen.
It's a very big hole. You can't miss it.
You can lose a space shuttle in this hole, Ted. But now, if you go to the south from Lead and Deadwood, again, you look for that little area that says Pluma. Going south is 385. Now, the happy little town of Galena is down there. We've seen Galena. We've shown a couple of videos of the area. That's where I got to see my first ghost. You continue down that road. There is Brownsville. They used to have mining there. Up the road from Brownsville is Edgewood, Edgemont. And then in that area up there was the old-fashioned Wasp, too. And a couple other mines, including Flatiron. Now, Flatiron is one that we're going to actually have to take and do a drive and then hike to, because Flatiron was a town that actually had for the lack of a better word, a landslide that buried a train. It killed the engineer, it collapsed most of the town, and from what I understand, the town didn't get uncovered for almost 50 years. There was so much debris and stuff. The towns of Lead and Deadwood were using the sand tailing piles from the town to salt their streets with. And of course, by this time, most of the surviving houses and stuff had fallen into the mining area. But there's some of those areas that we'll be taking and doing a touch on. As you go out past Lead, there is the Cheyenne Crossing, which is really kind of cool because excellent place for Indian tacos. Then when you go north, you have the Spearfish Canyon. You have Rucklock Waterfalls. You also have an area further up there where there's a couple more old towns that are, not really in existence anymore. Preston is one of them. And we were going to go look at Richmond Hill, but unfortunately the gates were shut. So we may have to wait either for a four-wheel drive truck. Our phone lines are open if you want to donate to getting a truck. But there's some areas up there where you would have to navigate around the Wharf Mining Project. If you ever want to look at it on Google Earth, it is a great big hole in the ground again, but this one is actually outside of the city. But if you look for a big brown scar and several encircling rings, it's an open pit mine to the west of Lead, South Dakota. But there are several of these small towns that are way up there still inside the trees, plus some cemeteries. And so we're hoping to check those out, if not before the snow, maybe early next year too. But this has been Joe for the Bud Files and the Bearded Historian. You folks have a good one, and we will see you tomorrow.